Hi everyone, my name is Waqar Chaudhary, and I'm the Technology Evangelist here at NuoDB. NuoDB is a NewSQL database without compromise.
And this is the Running NuoDB Side-by-Side with MySQL webinar.
Thank you for joining me today. For those of you who joined us last month for the MySQL migration webinar, this is essentially a continuation of what we showed you last time around with the addition of replication. Today's webinar agenda includes the MySQL replication, why NuoDB, a replication demo, and then finally we'll end with a Q&A session. Of course, you're welcome to type in your Q&A during the webinar at any point using the Q&A section of the GoToMeeting window. So if you're a veteran of the database world or you're a developer who's built applications on top of MySQL before, this might be a familiar scenario. You start off with a simple e-commerce application that runs on an application server that connects to a MySQL database. And then you have clients that connect to your application server that browse your e-commerce website and purchase stuff from you. As your business grows, you add more stakeholders to your process and you add new requirements to your application. These requirements sometimes include reporting, business intelligence, maybe somebody wants to know shopping cart abandonment, product performance type questions that you need to use your MySQL database to answer. So you add a reporting environment to your existing application. Many of you probably have already spotted the problem with this type of a solution. You're going to immediately run into scaling problems as your customer base increases. People are going to be pounding away against your e-commerce website, reading reviews, buying products, adding stuff to their shopping carts. Well, in the background, your analysts are going to be pounding away on the same database, running analytics, reporting, and trying to figure out how to get customers to buy more stuff. Something is going to give. And more than likely, your application is going to fall down when one of these analysts runs a long-running query that brings your database to a screeching halt. Okay, so no big deal. You can simply set up a simple MySQL replica and then make all of your reporting go up against the replicated database. Now, there are definitely trade-offs to this solution. Your replica will be slightly behind the actual OLTP system, but that's okay. A little bit of a lag is not a problem. You're still an early-stage company, and you guys have a long way to go. Over the next 12 to 18 months, much to everybody's surprise, your e-commerce website goes viral. You're on the verge of becoming the next Amazon.com. And as time goes on, you've added more and more complexity to your application and your database stack to handle the increased volumes and traffic that your e-commerce website needs to handle. So you've now got a very elegant MySQL solution with application and database level caching. You have failover built in. You have session management. You've set up a completely different structure for content management. And you have a vibrant community of people that has its own MySQL database with many replicas and caching systems in and of itself. And you've grown up enough to where you're investing in some tooling, and some support, and you've deployed a MySQL Enterprise Monitor, and you're paying this company lots of money to come in and give you guys support. What can possibly go wrong? Okay, so many of you saw this last time around, but there's lots of people who are joining the webinar for the first time today. So for those of you who have been with NuoDB for a long time, I thank you for your support. And for those of you who are joining NuoDB for the first time or are new to NuoDB, let me introduce NuoDB, a NewSQL database without compromise. It's built from the ground up on a distributed architecture designed for geo-distributed data management. It gives you scale-out performance, zero downtime, and it's a proven ACID SQL solution. Data center that's connected to some form of persistent disk. This is the most basic and simple deployment of NuoDB on a single host and on multiple hosts. That's participating within this domain. This example shows a single logical database being scaled across 4 different machines. We've added 3 transaction engines to scale your transactional throughput, and we've added a storage manager to continue to persist your existing data. Now, as you add additional transaction engines, you should see near linear scalability. The more transaction engines you add, the faster your database will go. This is done without partitioning, without replication, or without sharding your database. Within a database with a mixed set of hardware and virtual resources. In addition to the two data centers, we also have a cloud deployment participating within this single logical database. We've chosen to deploy 3 brokers to provide high availability and failover, several transaction engines to give your users the kind of throughput and user experience that they're looking for, and 2 storage managers that enable your database and your application to have a completely redundant data store in case of failover. This unique architecture allows you to meet your customer demands by pushing the data where your customers are. For example, if you had an e-commerce site that was deployed globally, let's say you had a data center in Tokyo, you had a data center in New York, and another data center in LA, you could move the data that was relevant to your customers to where they were. So if your customers in New York are hitting the database hard, they'll always be connected to a data center that's closest to them. Whereas if your customers in LA are hitting the data center hard, they'll be connected to the data center that's closest to them, and the same goes for your customers in Asia. What this does for you is it allows you to push the data closer to them to give them a better user experience with extremely low latency. Okay, so here's the best thing about NuoDB. It uses a SQL standard, so you can use NuoDB the same way that you'd use any other database through SQL. For developers, we support all of the standard languages and ORM technologies that you're already used to. So whether you're building an enterprise app in Java, a quick web app with PHP, or something super cool in Node and Python, you can go ahead and use NuoDB in conjunction with those languages and all of the supported ORM technologies the same way that you would any other database. We also have extended tool support for Squirrel SQL, DB Visualizer, and any popular SQL editor out there that supports ODBC and JDBC. We have an ADO.NET driver for Visual Studio and the .NET folks. We work with Eclipse, and you'll see an example of some Pentaho reporting as part of today's webinar as well. Guys want to use. Okay, so I know I've thrown a lot at you guys in a short amount of time, and before we begin the demo, I just want to give everybody the opportunity to go ahead and type in any questions that you may have in the Q&A section of GoToWebinar, and some of the folks that are helping me out on today's webinar will answer your questions. Don't worry if we don't get to your questions today. We will post all the answers to your questions to our community forum. All right, so now without further ado, let's jump right into today's demonstration. Okay, today's demo, I'm going to walk you through 4 individual steps to get everything started. First and foremost, we are going to use an e-commerce example, and the example that we're going to use is the Storefront demo that's designed by NuoDB. It's open source and available on GitHub. Step 2 is going to be to get the NuoDB migrator set up, and this is the same migration utility that we used in last month's webinar. Step 3 is to actually migrate the Storefront data from MySQL into NuoDB. And then finally, step 4 is going to be to replicate ongoing transactions from the MySQL database into NuoDB as more and more people use the Storefront. Right, let's quickly switch over here to GitHub. So it's simply github.com/NuoDB, and you can see all of the different samples and drivers and applications that are available for you. The migration tools are available for you in the migration tools section, and then the NuoDB Storefront is available in the NuoDB sample section. So I've already gone through and downloaded the Storefront demo and gotten it set up. The next step that we want to do is we want to create a user account for the NuoDB Storefront within MySQL, and the username should simply be Storefront user, and the password should also be Storefront user. And then we want to also create the schema that the sample application is going to use, and I'll go ahead and do that right now. So it's simply create schema, Storefront, and execute. Once that schema is created, we're going to go ahead and switch over to the MySQL workbench. I'll go ahead and refresh this, and you'll see that the Storefront schema is actually available. Okay, so now that we have the schema and the username set up, let's go ahead and start up the Storefront demonstration itself. And the way that we do that is by kicking it off the command line. Just simply follow the instructions that are available to you on GitHub. So I'm going to go ahead and start up Tomcat, in which the storefront demo runs. And then let's go ahead and open up the browser and navigate to where the storefront demo is. And I believe that I've set it up on port 8889. Hit enter. And this should bring up the demo. And as you can see, is the first step that you want to do is you want to actually load the products into the storefront demo into MySQL, and you have two options here. You can generate 5,000 fake products without pictures, or you can generate 900 real products with pictures. And we're actually pointing to Amazon.com to see these pictures, so you do need a live internet connection for this to work. So I'll go ahead and load the 900 real products. And once these products are loaded, you're going to be brought into the storefront itself. It's just like any other e-commerce website that's available to you. It's actually fully functional. You can go in, you can read reviews, you can submit a review, you can add things to carts, things of that nature. But what we're really interested in here is the control panel section itself. And the control panel actually allows you to simulate load on the application. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that might look like. So, customers browsing and reviewing. Maybe there's 100 people online doing that. Customers browsing only. Maybe there's 200 of those guys. Maybe there's 10 people who already know what they want. The instant purchaser option is actually grayed out. It's actually designed to be used in scale-out demonstrations, and since this isn't going to be a scale-out demonstration on top of MySQL, it's not functional right now. And then maybe we have 50 or 60 people that are slow purchasers. Once you update workloads, you'll see that the statistics and metrics that we're measuring for you up top, they start generating values. So right now there's 360 active users. As time goes on, you can see that the number of items in the cart are going up, and you can also see the number of service calls per second that the system is making. We can quickly test how this is all working within the storefront. Now that the tables are populated, I can simply right-click, and you can see that there are indeed selections within the shopping cart itself. I can modify this a little bit, and you can see that this thing is working in real time against the MySQL database. So I can do a select count star and execute this, and as you can see, the value continues to change as people add stuff into the shopping cart and as users continue to check out, right? So let's go ahead and head back, and if we go back to the shopping site, again, things will continue on as they did before, and then behind the scenes, these other things will continue to happen. Now, I am a new user to this shopping cart here, and as more and more people come online, they'll be basically added to the same metric system that's back here. Now, because I'm running this on top of MySQL, you can see that there are a relatively small number of users in here are causing the database from time to time to lock up. That's because of how SQL is set up in terms of row locking and things of that nature. So if somebody's trying to update a particular product and somebody else is trying to read it, or maybe two people are trying to update it, that should generate some kind of a heavy load scenario for the database. Okay, all right, so now let's go ahead and set up the NuoDB side of the equation. Let me flip back here to the text editor. And one of the things that we have in the NuoDB product download is this thing called a quick start. And what I've done is I've gone in and I've modified the quick start and turned it into a webinar quick start. And essentially, the only thing that this changes is the name of the database that gets set up front, and a few of the user accounts have been modified also to better suit this demonstration. But other than that, it's essentially the same quick start guide that you would get with NuoDB when you download it and install it for the first time. So let's go ahead and get this running to get the database up and running. Okay, so once this quick start runs, it's going to start up the NuoDB web console on port 8080, and I can go in and take a look at what that looks like. So let's open that. And this is what the console looks like. The home page is going to show you basically a bunch of the samples that we ship with, the quick start guide, the admin guide, the Explorer, which is our own version of a query editor, which we'll jump into as well. The storefront demo, it also ships as part of the product, but when we ship with the storefront demo, we're actually running it on top of NuoDB, which you'll see later on during the webinar. And then also all the GitHub samples that we started off the demonstration process with are accessible directly through the product itself. All right, so let's go into the admin section and show you guys exactly what happened with that quick start setup that I had gone through. And if I can type in the password correctly, we should be good to go. Okay. So as part of the webinar quick start, I've provisioned essentially a database on one host, and it's running two processes, a storage manager and a transaction engine. So if we click on the database, you can see that it is called Storefront. If I click on Storefront, you can see that there are indeed two processes running on top of it. Okay, so now let's jump into the Explorer section. So you can see that there is a storefront that's already been provisioned. Let me just log in. Again, the username and password is defaulted to storefront user, and the password is also storefront user. And right now, there is a storefront schema, and there's a bunch of tables in here. So this storefront schema corresponds to the storefront that NuoDB ships with. So what we want to do is we actually want to create a new schema that is generated from the MySQL schema. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to use, again, the three simple steps that we talked about in last month's webinar using the NuoDB Migrator. And if we go back to the text file, I've actually pre-prepared some of those steps for us. And let me quickly go ahead and run these in the terminal. And the first step is to dump, is to actually replicate the schema over from MySQL into NuoDB. The second step is to get the data out of MySQL. And then the third step is going to be to load the data into NuoDB. You can obviously script this so that it's just all one single step, but just for purposes of illustration, I'm going to go ahead and execute each of these steps individually. So let's go back to the Explorer. Let's refresh the screen, and let's look at the storefront. And this time when we look at the storefront, there should be two schemas in here, the MySQL storefront schema and the storefront schema. And the MySQL storefront schema should contain all of the tables that were originally in the MySQL database. Okay, so now that we've migrated the data over, and the way that I can check is if I double-click the cart selection, this will be the last set of cart selections that were in the MySQL data. We actually need to go ahead and set up replication through Tungsten in order for this to capture the data from MySQL in a real-time or near real-time fashion. Let's go ahead and get that set up. And the way that we do that, again, is you can download Tungsten from GitHub itself and follow the instructions to build it. I've already done that. And the other thing that I've already done is I've pre-configured some of the switches that we can run, again, from the command line and get this thing set up. So let me copy that. And we're going to go ahead and execute that step here. And all this is doing is setting up the Tungsten process, connecting to MySQL, and I have to give it the right permissions before we can do that, and just run it as sudo, and should be good to go. And while that's getting set up, let's go ahead and set up the actual replication piece to NuoDB. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to essentially just run the same thing, and it looks like I made the same little error here. Let me give it the right privileges, and we should be good to go. So now, effectively, we should be migrating in real time from the MySQL instance of the storefront into the NuoDB instance of the storefront, and we can easily test that by going back into the Explorer section, and we'll run the same little query that we ran in MySQL on NuoDB. And as we execute this, we should see that over time the counts will change based on the replication that's happening on the MySQL side. So let's go ahead and let's refresh this, make sure that this is still working properly, and it is. And let's go ahead and maybe kick this up a little bit to generate some statistics faster. Okay, and essentially what I've done is I've upped the total number of customers that are now browsing and generating stuff, and I'll also up the total number of purchasers to kind of get this thing really going. Okay, and let's go back to the console and let's execute. And as you can see, the number of cart selections in NuoDB is increasing directly from the replication that's happening on the MySQL side. Okay, so as you can see, we can continue executing the same query over and over again, and things will continue to change on the NuoDB side. But what's the whole point of this exercise? The point is to enable other stakeholders within the company to derive value from the existing product and scale out the MySQL database into NuoDB. So maybe one of the things that the stakeholders of the storefront are interested in are product performance type analytics. So let's go ahead and paste in this very simple query. It's essentially just looking at product, and it's looking at the distribution of products across the various shopping carts and the total value of the products in these shopping carts by product. So this is one type of analytic that you can run. You can also do the inverse of this, where you can do actual shopping cart analysis. And again, my queries are fairly rudimentary. So essentially, I'm just looking at, hey, what's the distribution of products across shopping carts, and then what's the value of each shopping cart that's currently within the system right now. How this could be useful is in real time, if you're able to message the people using the storefront to either add one more item and get free shipping, or add one more item and get 5% off, you can essentially increase the lift in sales using this type of a setup. Now, what would be more optimal is if you were able to kind of create standard reports and maybe schedule these, or create some kind of a dashboard that would send you alerts when things within the system changed. And early on in the webinar presentation, I mentioned that I would show you how that's done on top of NuoDB using Pentaho Reports. So what I've done is I've essentially created a simple report on top of NuoDB using Pentaho. I'm just using the open source report designer version of Pentaho. Obviously, if you are a user of an enterprise version, you can actually set up a server, set up a dashboard, and really get a look at a real-time analytics system. But the way that you set up NuoDB on top of the reporting system is really configured through JDBC. And I've essentially created a data source called NuoDB. I can go in and show you exactly how I set up the connection. I went in, I created a new data source, a generic database. I added the JDBC driver information for NuoDB for the specific database that I wanted to connect to, including the specific schema in that database. Then I pointed it to the driver class name, which again is found in the NuoDB installation directory. And all you have to do is move that jar file into the JDBC folder of the report designer, and you're good to go, and provided a username and password. You can test it, make sure it works, click OK. And what I've done is I've actually gone in and I've created source queries within the report runner that essentially generate the same data that you saw me generate on the NuoDB Explorer. And I'm doing it both from a customer performance perspective as well as a product performance perspective. So this will tell you, hey, who are my high-value customers versus what are my high-value products. Click OK. The report, again, is very rudimentary and simple. It's simply a tabular report that gives me the product, the shopping carts that the products currently exist in, the total number of products, and then the total value of the products that's represented in the cart selection at any given point in time. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this, and I'll run this as an HTML file. And it should open up in a nice browser, and I've set up my headings, and it tells me what the product ID is, the number of shopping carts that this particular product can be found in, the total quantity of this product, and the total value that this product currently represents at any given point in time within the database. All right, so that kind of wraps up the replication portion of today's webinar. Now let's get into why it's a good idea to actually replicate into NuoDB as opposed to setting up another MySQL replica. So one of the things that we talked about during the webinar, the presentation portion of the webinar, was NuoDB's capability of scaling elastically or in a near linear fashion. And the way that we're going to scale this database is by adding an additional host to the storefront. And the way that we'll do that is by adding a second VM to participate in this domain. So I've pre-provisioned the VM, and essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to join this VM to that existing domain where the storefront database is running by executing this simple command. And as soon as I execute this command and go back, you'll see that now there are two hosts participating in this particular domain. Let's click the database and take a look at the number of processes that are currently running on this database. And as you can see, there are two processes that are running on this database, one transaction engine and one storage manager. And what I want to do is I want to add a second transaction engine to increase the computational throughput of this database. We'll go ahead and click Add Process. We'll select the host that we want to add it to, and this is the new host that I just joined this domain, VMBird02. And the type of process that I want to add is a transaction engine. I hit Submit, and what it does is it automatically provisions a second transaction engine on that host that we just joined, and any incoming transactions that need to be handled above and beyond what the first host is handling will automatically be diverted to VMBird02. This allows me to continually grow the computational throughput of my database, add additional concurrent connections, run more complex analytics that may take a longer time to run than the capacity of one host would allow me to allow you to run. Okay, so now that we have kind of gone through the replication process, the scaling process of the replica, the next real logical step is to eventually port over your application directly onto NuoDB and completely shut down replication. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'll go ahead and start up the storefront demo on NuoDB. And one of the things that I want to do next, once the storefront demo is up and running on NuoDB, which it is right now, we can go in and take a look at the site. It's now running on NuoDB. Is you can actually go in and we'll kill the storefront that was actually running on MySQL within the command line here. And that's done. Now you can effectively shut down replication, shut down MySQL, and then get your application running directly on NuoDB without any problems. And then as you want to scale this application, well, simply add more processes and your application is good to go. No more scrambling to re-architect your entire backend and introduce a lot of unnecessary complexity into your applications and deployments. So that about covers everything that I wanted to go over in today's webinar. Just to recap, we essentially set up the NuoDB storefront to run on top of MySQL. We then migrated the bulk of the data from MySQL into NuoDB using the migrator. Then we used the Tungsten replicator to replicate from MySQL directly into NuoDB. We then created a couple of reports, first in SQL, then in Pentaho, to show you product performance and customer performance. And then we finally scaled out the NuoDB side on a second host machine, and then we're able to switch completely off of the storefront running on top of MySQL and started running it on top of NuoDB. And moving forward, any kind of database scaling that needs to happen is simply taken care of for you by NuoDB and by simply adding additional hosts and additional processes. All right, so I know that we have covered a lot in today's presentation. So let's quickly jump into the Q&A section. If you haven't already done so, please enter any questions that you may have into the Q&A section of the GoToWebinar window. And also, if you have not had an opportunity to visit our Dev Center, please go to nuodb.com/Dev Center, and you'll find all kinds of resources that will be helpful in deploying your application and building your application on top of NuoDB. If you're curious in terms of what our engineers are doing and thinking, be sure to visit our tech blog, www.nuodb.com/tech blog. Also, if we do not get to your answer in today's session, don't worry, we'll definitely reach out to you individually, and we're also going to be posting all of the answers to the questions to our community forum.
Okay, everyone, so it's time for Q&A. My name's Lori. I'm here with Paul Lothridge and Duke Adamanis. Duke is our Director of Customer Support, and Paul is our Program Manager over here at NuoDB. And they are ready to take your questions. So go ahead and type them in the chat window, and we're going to get started with a few here.
So one question that came in is whether or not there is a limit to the number of domains that can be set up with NuoDB, and there is no limit to the number of domains that can be created. The domain is really just the boundary in which one or multiple databases reside, and there's no limit to the number of databases that can reside in a domain as well. Some of this will be controlled via your license. If you have a developer license, you're unlimited to the number of domains, number of hosts, etc. that can be set up, but there is no limit, provided you have the correct license.
Thanks, Duke.
There's another one here. Are there plans for an Oracle version of the Replicator? Well, right now, the current plan is to work with MySQL. In the future, if we're getting demand for it, sure, we'll take that under consideration.
I would also say those who want to use Oracle, please make a post to that in our community forums. Good point, Duke. Because it's essentially a place for the community to tell us what's important to them. So if this is a feature that most people are looking for, it's certainly something that we want to heed and something that we want to put into our future planning.
Yeah. You want to take one, Duke?
Sure. NuoDB with two storage manager nodes works as a master, right? And that is correct. Although we would encourage you to not think of it as a master setup, we would encourage you to think of it as a single logical database, because that's really how NuoDB operates. As one storage manager receives, actually both storage managers receive updates from the transaction engines at the same time. So there's no syncing, there's no, as your application is running, there's no update, there's no replication between the storage managers necessarily as new data comes in. It's all happening together in real time. Something else to call out also is that this functionality works out of the box. There's no additional configuration steps, no server restarts, no nothing. You start up your database with one storage manager, set it to work, and when you start up a second storage manager, out of the box, that will automatically sync with the existing storage manager. And as soon as that sync is complete, it will then be available for updates, live updates from your transaction engines in the database.
We just had another question come in from David Kwok. He asks, MySQL supports he asks, since NuoDB is such a powerful database that can scale effectively versus MySQL, is there any features in MySQL that is not found in NuoDB? The answer here is that MySQL definitely has more varied syntax, and many of those are specific to MySQL. We're always working to add more functionality, and including some of the MySQLisms, as we like to refer to them here. So look for those in future releases.
Another question, sort of unrelated to the product, but related to the recording, is whether or not the recording will be made available online, and it will be. We will send out a link to everyone who's attending today's webinar to that link, so you'll be able to replay it and send it around.
think we can do one more here, Lori, if you'd like.
That'd be great.
Again, this is from David. Thanks, David, for the questions. Suppose I'd like to scale up Joomla, previously against MySQL backend. Would NuoDB today be a suitable candidate without any code-based changes to Joomla? Philip answered this one, and I'll just repeat it here so everybody has a chance to see it. We've not tried porting Joomla specifically, but we have ported a few other applications, provided that the application itself is properly modularized and has a database abstraction layer. Porting it to NuoDB should be doable. And thanks again for the questions.
All right, so we'll just give you guys another second here. Let's see if there's any final questions. All right, I think that's all we have time for today. So if we didn't get to your question, we will answer it on our community forums, and we'll send out a link to that thread with the webinar recording. All right, so thanks everyone for joining. Thanks Duke, thanks Paul, thanks Waqar, and we'll see you next time.